Questo è il Passo Doble.
This is Passo Doble, Tierra Soleada. In this particular case, we're tasting a 2020 vintage. Well, as always, Passo Doble is generous in terms of its color, an intense ruby red, reminiscent of the colors of cherries, of well-ripened Morello cherries. Then in the nose it has these fruity notes, red fruit, a slight Appassimento.
Appassita.
Now then, let's taste it.
In bocca è pieno, suadente.
It's full, persuasive, soft, an extraordinary softness that ends with a spice. These vanilla tones, but also cocoa in the aftertaste that are particularly gentle and also elegant. This has Malbec and Corvina. Malbec from fresh grapes, while Corvina is from grapes with a slight appassimento.
Fresche, mentre la Corvina è da uve leggermente appassite.
L'appassimento qui a Verona, in Valpolicella.
The drying process here in Verona and in Valpolicella is historically used to give us the opportunity to do what, let's say, nature or the varieties alone are unable to provide: a wine of great structure. Valpolicella wine, however good it is more or less an everyday wine. And this is what Corvina grapes give us. To get a superior wine, I don't have a sufficiently warm climate. I don't have sufficiently structured varieties. So what do? I use Appassimento, or drying. And this is the reason why Appassimento has remained here in Valpolicella. I mean, the ancient Romans practiced the Appassimento technique all over the world, but for the most part it was lost because it was no longer necessary. But here it's necessary in order to have structured wines.
Per avere I vini strutturati.
The Appassimento, or drying of grapes, is a complex process where many elements come into play, but the one that governs them all is time.
L'appassimento ci dà anche un'altra caratteristica.
Appassimento also provides us with another characteristic, not only that of strength and importance, it also gives us gentleness, softness. A fantastic example is what we did in Friuli with the Refosco grape. It's a grape that, I always say this, by itself can reach 15 degrees alcohol with Amarone without any major problems. It's a hard grape. It's a really tannic grape, requiring a lot of aging in wood to soften it a little. With Appassimento, it becomes gentle immediately. We did the same thing in Trentino too, with the Marzemino grape. This grape, too, is light. I don't remember exactly. A wine about 11.5 degrees, 12 degrees alcohol, more or less. Always a little bit, here they would say garbetta, a little bit tart, a little bit pungent. And then also the smell is a little acrid. With Appassimento, even a very light one, it softens. It takes on more violet notes and therefore softer. And the same thing in Argentina. There too there's a grape, Malbec, strong and important, which ripens really well, which produces rich wines, really dense, fleshy, in fact, too fleshy. They almost taste like blood, licorice, and even there, Appassimento refines it, lending it characteristics that are softer, more delicate.
Più morbide, più delicate.
This gentleman is Raffaele Boscaini, Marketing Director and Coordinator of the Technical Group of Masi Agricola, and representative of the 7th generation of a family which has been producing wine for many, many years. 250 years, to be exact. What we're going to talk about today is also his story, but above all, it's the story of a company and a wine that made the culture of time the key to its success. My name is Matteo Caccia. Welcome to the Magic of Time, 250 years of Masi.
The harvest here in Valpolicella historically began on the October Madonna, which is the 7th of October. Today, it must be said, it has moved forward by at least 20 days due to the issue of global warming. When you harvest in the hills, first of all you go through the rows and pick the best bunches. Which are the best bunches? The more sparse ones, the more open ones. And these parts of the grapes are collected in small boxes with great care and then taken to the barns in what are now called the Appassimento rooms or drying lofts or fruttaio. We still do it like this for almost all the harvest. We place them on bamboo racks, spread out in rows, or with the peduncle on the same side, so that they remain for a long Appassimento in an airy environment, in a protected environment, where you can close the windows if the weather is unfavorable, so that you can avoid having too much humidity, or when it's foggy out, when the fog comes in, etc. Today, we also employ systems that allow us to better control and govern this process. They remain there from harvest time from about, let's say, from the beginning of October, so October, November, December, and they more or less always get crushed in mid-January to mid-February.
Da metà gennaio a metà febbraio.
Sto entrando nel fruttaio.
I'm now entering the drying loft. The drying loft is a room located here on the second floor of the estate, above the arched entrance. And it's a large room, a loft, in fact, that's filled with these bamboo racks. The place where the grapes will rest for 3-4 months to dry. And the interesting thing is that the drying process happens in these rooms in a completely natural way, simply by opening the windows.
Aprendo le finestre.
The windows on one wall and the other on the opposite wall open, arranged with one to the north and the other to the south. And the air that passes dries and withers the grapes and provides them with this natural drying, or appassimento, which then turns this grape into the one that Amarone is made with.
Si fa l'amarone.
Taking a tour of a Masi drying room is like entering a time machine. From the latch that closes the main door to the wooden shelves, to the windows that frame the fabulous landscapes of Valpolicella, this is where the almost sacred technique of Appassimento is performed.
It's an ancient technique which began with the Romans and developed over the years, and has also been developed extensively here. Through our technical group and in collaboration with universities, we have explored the topic by understanding, not only on a microbiological level, but also on a genetic level, how grapes behave during this process. It was more interesting than we imagined, because up until 15 years ago, everyone believed, even on a scientific level, because it had never been studied properly, that Appassimento was a simple dehydration, a reduction in water. Yes, a concentration of sugars, color, acidity. But instead, the study noticed that the grape, right inside the grape, has a series of genes that are turned on during ripening. Towards the final stages of ripening, other genes begin to turn on. And this is the extraordinary thing. Genes that were normally off on the plant turn on 20, 30, 50, 60 days after being harvested, after being cut. Appassimento is something out of the ordinary. We didn't think that life was still developing in something no longer active.
Su una natura morta.
My name is Andrea Dalcin, and here in the company I deal with the wine sector and cover the role of enologist.
Il ruolo di enologo.
Andrea Dalcin has a polite and gentle manner and speaks almost in a whisper. as if he wanted to keep secret this ancient art of enology, even when he explains highly technical issues, such as the genetic effect of Appassimento.
A che cosa porta? Alla produzione di determinate
Where does this lead to? To the evolution of certain substances in specific grapes, and coincidentally, the studies we did were comparative. So Sangiovese, Syrah, Merlot, compared with Corvina, Rondinella. Unlike Oseleta, there are grapes that react, that have a very good behavior if vinified freshly. Yet if vinified after Appassimento, they almost seem to react and say, no, I don't want to be dried, else I'll produce bitter substances. These here, on the other hand, like others, produce extra polyphenols. In the case of Corvina here, a greater color, not only due to the concentration, but also due to the whole gene effect. And this is the thing we've been studying. We collaborated on this study and have come to that interesting conclusion. Here at Masi, specifically, we also studied the attack of molds in the case of noble rot. It's useless denying and saying there are no molds on grapes. Molds are there because they're a natural process. We don't sterilize the grapes before they're dried. Our Appassimento processes aren't sterile. Yes, they're sanitized, but they're not sterile. Therefore, under certain conditions which normally occur during Appassimento, meaning temperature and humidity conditions, the fungus penetrates inside the grape, increases its dehydration, and increases the production of substances that we've already mentioned, glycerin, gluconic acid, which make the wine much more rounded when tasted.
Rendono molto più rotondo all'assaggio il vino.
When Andrea Dalcin says, "we studied," he isn't speaking unintentionally. When he says "we," he's speaking about a very specific and highly trained group of people who work on the most technical and elaborate part of winemaking, a team of people who make up part of the so-called Masi Technical Group.
Il gruppo tecnico nasce alla fine degli anni 70.
The technical group was born in the late 70s. We had a real guru, a friend of my father, who worked with him and so on. A great wine psychic, as well as being a good winemaker. And I noticed that when walking around with him, well, he was like a second father to me, I have to say. I owe a lot to him. I noticed that when the wine was good, he would say, I did it. Whereas when there was something wrong, he would say, in the vineyard they didn't work well, in the cellar they didn't work well, etc., etc. And this bothered me a little, you know. But I understand it because I might have done the same thing too. Yeah, it's clear that when one tries to assert themselves for the work they've done, and they might be convinced that everything else was done poorly by others. But I said, I don't want a Franceschetti wine in this particular case. I want a Masi wine. And Masi wine, since there is no singular Mr. Masi who does it, can only be carried out by teamwork, by a group. And it was an intuition that isn't easy to develop. A group where there is viticulture, where there is enology, where there's quality control, but also marketing, because then everything contributes to the final product. And obviously you need to have a very good technical coordination, but also a good coordination of work discipline. I have to say that, well, we started in 78. My father told me, you're Masi president in 78. And I immediately, the first thing I did, I kept inside my brother. There was also Mr. Franceschetti. There was a cellarman at the time. And I brought this Paronetto in, and so on. We created the first structure of the technical group with its precise task to bring out the value of our company.
Il valore dell'azienda.
Well, the technical group meets up, let's say, 15 times a year, more or less once a month, on different topics. We always have an order of business, which can address some new opportunity, some seasonal deadline. For example, last week, we tasted the superior whites of our most recent vintage.
I bianchi superiori dell'annata appena trascorsa.
What you're listening to is a fly-on-the-wall recording from a session of the Masi Technical Group, which is usually inaccessible to anyone other than the members of the group itself. From the noise of the bottles and the clinking of glasses, it might seem like a dinner with friends. But, as you've heard, what's being discussed here is quite serious.
When we have our meeting sessions, our tastings, especially when we taste the wines and so on, after having completed all our technical analysis on how the wine is, the last question we ask is it Masi wine? Inside, there must be something in the wine, in its colour, in its smell, in the emotion it brings us, something that leads us back to Masi. Then and only then have we finished our work. The other important function of the technical group is research and development. It's not just about making products, but also looking ahead.
Guardare avanti.
And looking ahead for this company and for this family means looking far, far ahead. Beyond borders, beyond the ocean.
My idea was, if we export our grapes and our system, which is a particularly original system, to the world, will we find other places like the French did? In actual fact, it wasn't easy at all. I tried in Hungary, I tried in Australia, in New Zealand, in China. And then I really looked into Oregon, California, and Chile. Instead, in Argentina, we found a place that seemed to us the most, for two reasons. The particular situation of Mendoza. At the foot of Aconcagua, much higher than here. It's 1,100 meters. It's a poor type of land, but rich in light, with little rain but lots of water for good irrigation. And also down to the suitability of the cultural environment. There you find many Italians and many Venetians, and they know what it's all about. They've heard about these grapes. It isn't anything new.
Di cosa si tratta, ne hanno sentito parlare di queste uve, non è nuovo.
At the foot of the Andes mountain range, in the Mendoza region, we find the Masi Argentine vineyards. This is where the company found the right place to make its own wine outside Valpolicella.
Masi Tupungato is a very beautiful project. It began with an almost scientific approach because numerous varieties were planted before identifying the most interesting ones from the point of view of the use, of the technique, of the application of the Appassimento technique. The climatic conditions that exist in those places are very similar. Warm spring and summer periods. And importantly, the heat also remains present during the autumn ripening phase. But I must say that in terms of humidity, Argentina has particularly dry conditions. It rains very little and therefore requires drip irrigation.
C'è bisogno dell'irrigazione goccia a goccia.
Masi Tupungato, Vigneti l'Arboleda.
Masi Tupungato, La Arboleta vineyard, is located in a municipality called Tupungato, inserted in the Valle de Uco, which is almost like an icon of viticulture in Mendoza, Argentina, a province of Mendoza. And we're at 33 degrees latitude, 69 longitude. We're level with Australia more or less on the western flank of the Andes mountain range.
Ovest della catena delle Ande. Io mi chiamo Carlo.
My name is Carlos Piattelli, and I hold the position of vice president of the company.
Dell'azienda.
By now, we've learned how to know the value of time in the production of the wines at this company, how fundamental the cycle of the seasons is, the alternation of day and night, but above all, how much patience is necessary to perform Appassimento properly. This is why Masi, once in Argentina, had to study every detail of that place, including the humidity found in the air.
The techniques we apply there include Appassimento, It's a different drying technique than what we have here, specifically because the natural conditions are very different compared to our climate, which is slightly more humid. I'm talking about the 3 Venetian regions, whereas in Argentina there is this rather dry climate, so the drying time is shorter. Instead of being 3 to 3.5 months as it is here, the desiccation of the grapes in question takes 20 to 25 days.
Disidratazione nel caso delle uve interessate.
Noi abbiamo
We have an annual average rain precipitation in the order of 250 millimeters. Instead, you have in Valpolicella, we're talking about perhaps more than 1,000. Therefore, the situation with the Appassimento is completely different. We carry out Appassimento of the grapes as well as double fermentation. However, we're always talking about a drying time of 20 days, 25 days, whereas in Italy we're talking about 3 months.
quando in Italia parliamo di 3 mesi.
Questo progetto, insomma, delle tenute.
In short, this project of our historical estates runs alongside a wider project of discovering how our grapes, our methods, could find a homeland outside Veneto.
Potrebbero trovare patria al di fuori del Veneto.
È un po' l'idea della famiglia, ma
A little bit of the idea comes from the family, but above all, it was Sandro's, our dear Mr. Amarone, as he's called.
di questo terroir.
He's in love with this land. He thought he could develop the Italian vines by making high-quality wines along with our vines that already had great success in the world. And so, out of this came the Passo Blanco, the Corbec, and Passo Doble, and its great success on the world market.
Anche con grande successo nel mondo commerciale.
In Argentina ci sono 2 varietà.
There are 2 internationally known varieties in Argentina that are white. The Torrontés grape, which has become a grape emblematic of Argentina, a variety that was brought there by the Spaniards, and we're talking about the 1500s to the 1600s, grew by natural selection, developing until today with an aromatic variety. In fact, the aroma of the grape is also found in the wine itself.
L'aroma dell'uva si trova poi anche nel vino stesso.
And then, of course, there is the case of Malbec. Malbec was brought to the university in Chile by a French professor at the end of the 19th century. And then, over the years, a selection was created, which, among other things, is also a clonal selection. A natural selection then took place in Argentina. And now we can speak of an Argentine clone.
In Argentina, e adesso si può parlare proprio di clone argentino.
Those are the 2 main varieties. As regards Masi Tupungato, our selection has focused specifically on an international variety closely connected to our territory, which is a Pinot Grigio combined with Torrontés. That's the case for the white wine. Whereas in the case of red, of the 2 reds we produce, Passo Doble and Corbec, we have Malbec as the representative grape and a Corvina.
Come uva rappresentativa e la Corvina.
Whether you're in Europe or on the other side of the ocean, there's always a great master who manages the destiny of the grapes and therefore of the wine. It's always the same: time.
Specialmente in questa industria, l'industria
Especially in this industry, the wine industry, an industry spanning centuries, it's clear how important time is, especially since we're always talking about sustenance. We must not lose sight of that. Here, there's love. There's especially the work of so many people, and time plays a very important figure. But behind all great wines, there are workers, there are people, there are collaborators, technicians, professionals who add not only their work, but their own professionalism as well, to always produce a spectacular product, recognized as such all over the world. Therefore, time is a very important issue. Time is accountable in this industry.
tempo e rende conto in questa industria, no?
Il tempo, penso.
I think how we spend time in our work is what we do close to nature, close to unpredictability, the beautiful, the ugly things that time gives us. Precisely the succession of seasons, so I believe it is the origin. I consider myself an optimistic person, precisely for this reason, because I know that even during the pandemic, I thought it'll stop raining.
Pensavo, smetterà di piovere. C'è sempre un tempo dopo.
There's always a time afterwards, and it can be for the better or for the worse. But after that, there's always another that can be better or worse still. And so it's a bit... Time is life, in fact, isn't it? The succession of things. And when I see a good or bad thing happen to me, I don't think twice about it. I'm sure my head looks ahead anyway.
La mia testa guarda comunque avanti.
So let's take some inspiration from Raffaele Boscaini, and let's look ahead and get ready for the next episode of this podcast, where we'll talk about the historical estates of the Masi Group, the perfect combination of past, present, and future.